All month long, we have been talking all things NGSS, and I wanted to end this series by bringing in someone who is still currently teaching in the classroom and using the NGSS, and who has been for the last decade. I just think it's really important for you guys to get to hear from people that aren't me, which is why I love having guests on the podcast. And at the end of this episode, I will share how you can be a guest on this podcast too. So before we get to there, I want to get you to this conversation that I had with Christina Agurcia. Christina is a 20-plus year veteran science teacher with experience in middle and high school sciences, including life science, physical science, biology, environmental science, including AP Environmental, chemistry, and physics. She has worked in both U.S. public schools and is currently at an international private school. Working with the NGSS since 2015, she's become her school's NGSS expert, leading school-wide trainings to empower elementary teachers to also facilitate science learning with an NGSS focus. She's also the teacher author behind Make Them Think, providing hands-on, minds-on resources for science teachers. In this episode, Christina shares all her thoughts on the NGSS, its 3D nature, and how she implements it with her students. When talking about phenomena, I loved she encourages that phenomena don't have to be phenomenal to be effective. The NGSS is really all about creating good scientists, and Christina shares how she does that in her international school. Plus, she also just shares a ton of resources and websites, all linked in the show notes for more NGSS support. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Christina Agurcia. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. Hi, Christina. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. I'm just really pumped to talk to you because you have a lot of experience with the NGSS, and I just cannot wait for my listeners to hear from you.
Well, thanks for having me.
So let's just dive right in. I did a survey for my listeners back in January, and I got so many NGSS questions. And one of the themes that I saw coming through was people just wondering, how do you think that the NGSS has changed science education? Because it has been around for a decade, and some schools are only just now getting on board. I know you've done it longer than the average school. So I'd love to hear what you think on that.
I have been working with the NGSS since 2015, so a decade. And our school kind of jumped in very timidly. In fact, our director said, hey, try it, but don't tell the parents you're doing this. And so I was all really excited about it. The basis for it, which is the framework for K through 12 science education, is a fabulous text if you want a PCL kind of teacher's book to read. And it tells what good science teaching is. And it really just rang true with what I believed already about what good science teaching is. It's teaching kids to be scientists. And that means they get in the messy work of doing science. It's really letting the kids go through developing these practices. And does that mean we have to throw away everything that we've done in the past? If you are more of a textbook person, no. Just kind of looking at it, modifying it, changing it more to the students developing these thought processes. And a lot of times, I think our director at the time that said, don't tell the parents you're going to do this, he was concerned from, coming at directors' meetings that it was very low level because it narrowed down the field. And I feel like if you read the documents, it says, these are your assessment boundaries. And so many people believe that, okay, well, that's all I can teach. But it is the assessment boundary. That's the minimum you can teach. And then, you can go on from there and keep adding and if your students are able and can do things.
What do you think though about the teachers? Because I think most teachers, like we look at the NGSS and you're like, this, like you said, this is science. Like this is just doing science. And anyone who had a great science educator growing up, this was how they were being taught before the NGSS existed. But the NGSS really helps for those teachers, like you said, who are just textbook, workbook, that kind of vibe. But I think some teachers, though, see it, they love it, they see it's valuable, but it feels like idealistic and not maybe very practical. I think secondary science is unique in that, you might be a biology person, but then you just get chemistry for your job. And so if you don't know the content very well, you may look at the standards and they feel like just so broad. And you're like, I don't really know like the details I should teach or whatever. Whereas like a lot of state standards, I read a lot of standards as part of my job. Like a lot of states are a lot more specific. So my question for you would be like, what encouragement or advice do you have for a teacher who might feel like they aren't practical?
Coming to the actual standards document is extremely overwhelming the first time you look at it because there is so much there crammed on one page.
Mm-hmm.
So I would really start looking at, okay, what are the DCIs? What's the basic content I'm going to teach? And then from there, okay, how can I allow my students to see this in a real life situation? Now, one of my favorite quotes, I can't tell you who I'm quoting from, but phenomena doesn't have to be phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
It can be, something that they may see in their everyday lives. Like, why is the wind blowing from the east on these days? And why is it blowing from the west on these days? What's going on? It doesn't have to be something that's like, wow, the kids are so excited and curious about it. Or it could be, okay, here's Mendel's data or simplified Mendel's data. So it doesn't have to be like this, wow, that's really making them super curious, although those are fun. You can do fun demonstrations, but also those things that just make kids go, why?
I know. I think some of my best phenomenal ideas come from questions that like my 5 and 7-year-old ask because they're so observant. Like they just observe everything around them in the world. And so they bring questions to the table. And then I'm like, that's a great question that could be like investigated. But I think one of the struggles that some teachers are seeing is they may present something and their students just aren't even asking any good questions. How do you kind of build that muscle to get them like curious?
Okay, see, this is another skill that you have to build with them. One of the things I saw Paul Anderson do, Paul Anderson's from Bozeman Science, and if you're an AP person, you know him. He also has a website called The Wonder of Science, which is a fabulous resource for anybody that's looking at NGSS. He's got tons of resources there. But when I've gone to a workshop with him, he has made us come up with questions, and then he has matched those questions to the cross-cutting concepts. So he said, okay, if your kids are having trouble coming up with questions, narrow it down to one cross-cutting concept that you want to see. Okay, so you can say, hey, we're going to observe this and we're going to look at the energy. What is the energy doing here? What questions do you have about the energy? And so your kids may be not conditioned to be very observant or to develop their own questions because those are skills that need to be developed. And so you may have to narrow their focus and have to say, okay, we're going to look at the red line. What do you notice is happening to the red line? What questions do you have about it? What patterns are you seeing? So you're kind of leading them along the way. And then as you are going throughout the school year, you can have them say, okay, so you guys have asked me 3 questions and they've been about this cross-cutting concept, this cross-cutting concept, this cross-cutting concept, but we've missed another cross-cutting concept that's pretty big, this one. So let's focus in on patterns. We didn't mention any questions about patterns. What questions do you have about patterns? And so that can really be a good tool for sometimes when students don't know how to take observations, kind of focus them in a direction, or don't know what questions to ask. And you may feel like then I'm taking away their free will of asking more questions. And always tell your kids, if you come up with more questions, then that's fabulous. I'm not limiting your questions. Just let's look at this because there are many kids that freeze and say, I don't know.
Right. That's great. Okay. So talking about phenomena, where are you getting like inspiration for them? Are you reusing the same ones every year? Are you bringing in new things on the spot? Or what are some of your favorites? Just anything you want to share about those.
Okay. Like I said, my phenomena are not phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah. We use Mendel's data.
Hmm.
Genetics unit, I have pictures of families of friends that their kids look very different from each other. And so, how are these two sisters? And then you look at mom and dad, you're like, okay, yeah, he's got mom's face, but dad's hair and that type of thing. And then I show another family where the two girls have very different skin color and the parents have a dark skin color. And so then we don't just look at the parents, we have to go back multiple generations. It could be simple pictures of things that they're seeing in their everyday life. In our electricity and magnetism unit, one of my favorite things is the jumping salt demo. So it's just rubbing a balloon and then salt jumps up to the balloon. And before that, salt didn't jump up to the balloon. And then why is salt jumping to the balloon? Not super phenomenal, but that one lab has brought in so many questions by the kids. And then they want to get the salt out of the cabinet, and then they want to get the sugar out of the cabinet, and then the sand. And is it on because we're doing this on a metal desk? No, we move over to the wooden desk. And so I get inspiration from so many places. Like I said, the Wonder of Science website from Paula Anderson is fabulous. There's another website that's just called NGSS Phenomena. Those are places, but don't feel that it has to be phenomenal. What's every day? What can your students see simply in the classroom? Can you find a YouTube video of something? I know physics wise, I'm in a AP physics teachers groups. I don't teach AP physics right now, but all the time they're bringing in little funny videos, TikToks of people doing things. And they're like, what's this kid playing on the playground? And why did they fly off? Why are they swinging back and forth and fell down? Those are all sorts of really good sources. I think we actually have a mountain of resources and you just have to kind of narrow down. Another thing that I think that some teachers get caught up in is these big anchoring phenomena. And big anchoring phenomena are good if you can find a good one. But I have found, and this is a thought expressed by multiple teachers, is if the anchoring phenomena is so large, the students lose it in the unit. So it's the more of the little phenomena along the way that keeps the interest. And then if you can tie it back to a big idea at the end, fabulous. I'm going to cite Paul Anderson's website again. He has some resources in there about assessments at the end that you can bring things back. And so you might pick one of his assessments as a anchoring phenomena and then test him on that again at the end is another way to do that.
So you mentioned the anchoring phenomenon. I think that really lends into the idea of storylines. And I think that's another kind of like buzzword people associate with NGSS. And it feels overwhelming. Like teachers think they have to rewrite, throw out everything they have and create an entire unit around this like one storyline from this one anchoring phenomena. I mean, you kind of touched on this, but just any other thoughts in general about like storylines and teachers maybe having that kind of mindset?
So the storylines are great if you can find one that you are like interested in. So I'll go back to my genetics unit. This family, why is this girl a very light skinned and her parents are dark skinned and her sister's also dark skinned? We are able to then go into multiple different small phenomena, Mendel's data, this, and then we go into Morgan's data on fruit flies and use those small pieces and then go back to the one big one at the end. I think it brings some interest at the beginning, but if you keep your kids only on that one big idea, they just kind of lose the interest.
Totally.
And I've seen some curriculum, Open Ed, for example, has curriculum where it's like one anchoring phenomena for like the whole quarter.
Wow.
I've heard, teachers mention that it's just so dry to get them to keep focusing on that one question all the time. And I'm not discrediting Open Ed. I think there's some great stuff there. But like I said, pick and choose.
Yeah. And I feel like their attention span is so short nowadays too. So like having them try to care about something for a quarter feels very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, one thing you mentioned in your application that I wanted to ask you more about was how you integrate cross-cutting concepts into each of your units in order to try to help them see how it kind of fits into the bigger picture. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Okay. With the cross-cutting concepts, I have a poster up in my classroom, and I am very explicit about introducing them and then going back to them. So I have a set of graphic organizers that I have for each of the cross-cutting concepts. And so if we are introducing structure and function for the first time, we talk about what structure is. We talk about what function is. I give them Legos and we make different structures and we talk about it in a very concrete way. And then every time that we are going to touch on structure and function, I'm pointing back up to the poster. Okay, so structure leads to function. And so they are very kind of conditioned to know that, okay, hey, we're talking about the structure of this, so we should lead to function. So being very, very explicit with your wording on those cross-cutting concepts. Oh, there's energy here. What do we know about energy? Energy can't be created or destroyed. So just be super, super explicit about them as you are seeing them. In my 6th grade right now, the way I do body systems is I focus on 3 big cross-cutting concepts as we go through human body systems. And so we structure and function, systems, and stability and change.
Mm-hmm.
And so they will see that in all the systems that we go through. And then their final assessment is to write me an essay about one of those that you've seen in all of the systems. So, for example, how can you tell me that the circulatory system is a system? Like, we've obviously practiced that. They've drawn system models. They have seen how parts are interacting. And then the final assessment is to show me that.
I love that because I think sometimes the assessments get overcomplicated.
Yeah.
Like people, and I think it's coming from like the district level and people who like don't understand the NGSS, but like want to make sure their teachers are implementing it. They're like, this, you got to have these 3D test questions. And they're kind of like getting overwhelmed by it when it's like, that is like such a good question and what you're doing right there and asking them to do. And I don't feel like it has to be crazy complicated.
I think that you can assess all 3 parts of the 3 dimensions. Do they have to be at all the times on all assessments? Right? That's ideal, but practically, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best things I've heard, I'm in a group with other international teachers in the TRI Association, which is Latin America and Central America and Northern South America. We get together for NGSS trainings. The people that are heading that, they're like, this is a hard curriculum and don't feel that you have to do everything all the first year.
Mm-hmm.
So your first year, if you just want to focus in on, okay, I'm going to get some phenomena going in my classroom. And then, okay, the next year, I feel like the phenomena are going well. So now I'm going to integrate focusing in on cross-cutting concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's something you do unit by unit. Maybe that's something that you do, year by year, especially if you're not in a place where you're supported by other teachers who've been doing this. Don't feel like you have to do it all at the same time. It is a work in progress. It is something that you can add. The big idea is you want your students to be practicing doing what scientists do. And so good scientists are observing. Good scientists are asking questions. Good scientists are seeking out credible information and reading from other scientists. A statistic I heard was that 50% of a scientist's work is actually in the communication SEP. They're reading.
Wow.
They are writing to other scientists and processing information. And so, yeah, many times we feel like, okay, the NGSS is the kids only doing hands-on experiments. But really 50% of a real scientist's time is reading scientific text, processing that information, then communicating with other science in speech and also written form what they've learned.
Well, and I think that obtain, evaluate, communication, SEP is like so important, like you said about the seeking out credible information, being able to evaluate if something's credible. I'm like always like, look at the fine print. Anything with a statistic, go look and see the sample size. Go see how many, like, where did the statistic come from? I think that I'm obsessed with the SEPs. That's like my favorite part of NGSS because, like you said, science is so much more than just doing a lab. There's all of this into it. Any tips for teachers with the SEPs? I know you love modeling. I love modeling too.
Yeah.
But what are you doing with those SEPs? Do you have them on a poster too, like you do with
Yep.
the CCC?
Yep. The poster's up at the front. And so again, very explicit. Okay, today we are working on asking good questions. Today we are working on evaluating information. And so telling your students exactly what skill they're working on and developing and letting them know that these are realistic skills. I have had teachers in other realms of not science teachers tell me, oh, it's really boring for the kids to read a scientific journal. It's way too complex. And I say, yeah, it's really complex reading. But I want them to know that when I ask them to write a lab report, and I'm not asking them to write lab reports all the time, but that this is a real scientific skill. That's real scientists write journal articles. And so we need to be able to read them. We need to be able to communicate back in that way to the scientific community. And so many times I do have them write a small conclusion to what we saw in a CER format. But yeah, do I still have them do traditional lab reports? Yeah, because that's how real scientists work. And so I do let them know explicitly, this is the skill we're working on. This is the skill we're working on. This is the skill we're working on. Look at what real scientists are doing. And so if you can get them viewing real scientists, I know Skype with a Scientist is a great program that you can get real scientists to come into your classroom virtually and talk with your students. And if you have any local connections with scientists, so that they are really seeing this in practical worlds. And real scientists are also people like mechanics, because mechanics are solving problems in a real world. And so, yeah, you might have somebody that is coming in and is on a technical skill, has come out of trade school, and you are showing how they're using science in real life too. That's another thing. I come from a context that's very academic based, but I know that many other schools don't. And so you may be looking at, well, okay, how is this applying to cooking science? And how is this applying to our real life practical skills that we are seeing every day? Our chemistry teacher always says, I teach solubility rules through doing laundry. How are you going to get rid of this stain? How are you going to get rid of that stain? So letting them see these practices in real life contexts and pointing back to them all the time. Of course, I'd love every student to go into a scientific field, but I know that's not really what's going to happen. So yeah, we're all going to have to evaluate information and become educated citizens to vote. Yeah, you're all going to have to go to the doctor and you're going to have to understand what's going on with your own health or your children's health or your parents' health. Yeah, you're going to have to deal with your car not working, and how are you going to deal with machines in your home not working, and how can you improve your energy bill and not pay so much? And so showing them how science skills are being an official scientist in a lab, but also being a scientist in your home every day.
Yeah, I love that idea of having the skills just explicitly out there. So you're saying like, these are the things we're going to train in and you're going to be equipped to do when you leave this classroom. Like you said, whether you're going to go on and do something academically scientific or not, like we are definitely where I live. Most students are going to go on to some sort of like vocational school or trade school, but there's so much of that scientific thinking, whether they're a boat mechanic, whether they're in cosmetology school, whatever, that there's like chemistry to it and things that will apply. And regardless of even if they don't do anything scientific, like you said, engaging in argument for evidence, asking good questions, defining and solving problems, like those are all great skills. So I love that you're like really emphasizing the skills. Are there any other, you mentioned some great websites and I've been like typing them to make sure we have them in the show notes, but are there any other like resources or websites or tools that you like to point teachers to help them with the NGSS?
So like I mentioned, the framework for K-12 education, which is the foundation for which the NGSS was written, is a fabulous resource for looking at what is good science teaching. And so if you are coming into being a science teacher where you were not going through actual official science teacher education, you're coming through an alternative path. I think that is a really good resource for you to look at. Getting in with local teachers and seeing what other people are doing is another good place. As far as storylines, I know the state of Illinois has a group called Illinois Storylines, and they have a Facebook group, and they do a really good job. Jason Crean is the person that leads that group, and he is a teacher out of Brookfield, Illinois, but he works closely with Brookfield Zoo in the Chicagoland area. And they have a lot of really good resources, and some of it's free. Some of it is, pay to play, but you can access that. And he hosts workshops on storylines and developing storylines. So that's another resource that's out there available. And I mentioned zoo. So when I was in Illinois, was taking a lot of classes through Brookfield Zoo. And I know that the Bronx Zoo also has, various different programs for teachers. Seek out those resources. I know the Smithsonian, like I mentioned, Bronx Zoo, Brookfield Zoo, San Diego Zoo, the Shed Aquarium out of Chicago. They all have teacher training classes that are NGSS based and are fabulous, down to earth practical stuff that will be able to kind of right out of the box teach. And so those are fun ones as well, if you can get your hands on those. As far as modeling, 3D MD has fabulous resources for modeling. So 3-dimensional molecular designs. They also have workshops for teachers, but they also have a lot of videos that you can access for free on their YouTube channel.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing all those. I would love to ask you before we go 2 more questions I always ask. First is, what's one way that you have simplified your life recently?
I love Google Forms because you can get a lot of information and then send it over to a Google Sheet and you have all of it coming together. Like I have my students do reading questions and I can grade all of their reading questions on one Google Sheet. I don't have to open a million files. I don't have to open a million pages of worksheets. It's all in one place. Or I am not a every class exit ticket or every class, welcome class ticket, but I know teachers that are, and I have resources that would allow teachers to do that. But if I'm going to do an exit ticket or a warm up, it's in a Google form so that I can very quickly see everybody's answers all on one screen and then have a place to go from. And so Google Forms.
Love it. All right. So tell the listeners before we go, what's the best place that they can find you?
Okay. I have a TPT store, Make Them Think, and I have a Instagram, Make Them Think TPT. And then I also have a newsletter, and I can send you the link for that.
Yes, please do. And we'll link it in the show notes.
I can also be found at Make Them Think TPT page is my email if anybody has any specific questions that they want to ask.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christina. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for offering the time and the platform. I love to share with other scientists and other science teachers. So it's been great to talk with you.
Of course. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode and my interview with Christina. You can find all links mentioned in the show notes at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 180. And if you have ever thought, hey, I could be on this podcast, I could share some practical, actionable strategies with other high school and middle school science teachers, then I would love to have you on the podcast. I'm going to link in the show notes an application I have open right now. I'm taking applicants for the next couple of weeks. I'm looking to do a bunch of interviews this summer with current science teachers just to hear all about what you're doing, what you're passionate about, what you feel like you do well in the classroom and could encourage other science teachers with. So if that resonates with you, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 180 and go down to the links and find the link to apply. You can also DM me on Instagram. I'm It's Not Rocket Science, and I can get you that link directly there. Now, if you have not left a review for the podcast, If you teach at an international school like Christina does, it's your turn. Leave a review for the Secondary Science Simplified podcast. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.